Hello and welcome to this episode of uh, The Vulnerable Me, which is a series in the uh, under the umbrella of the Values Workshop. Um, for a long time, I have been checking on the vulnerabilities of other people. I have the pleasure of exposing my own to start uh, with a guy that I look up to and am enthralled by his everyday insights and a deep thinker, uh, funnily a rational guy and a emotional guy and a good artist and one who presents concepts that are so difficult to understand in in everyday language. Even then, I find it heavy sometimes, and it forces us to ponder. So let me welcome Hemant Gupta, who's been a friend for a long time. We connect once a year or something, but then connect as if we've never been out of connection. Welcome to this podcast, Hemant.
Thank you, Bunty, and thank you for your kind introduction.
No, I have a question to start with on that very note. I was just setting this up, and it struck me that I am sometimes scared to ask you questions on what you've written because it may seem like, oh, it's so basic. How did I miss it? And that set me thinking. While I am also on the same route, and I'm trying to understand paths in our mind which are often wordless or may not have ample words, or I may not have the vocabulary. Why are we so scared of admitting that we do not know, even to people who we connect so deeply with, like I do with you? uh, that was the question that was lingering. I said, okay, instead of asking about your vulnerability, let me start with one of my own. How do you view this? Do you agree? And according to you, what really happens inside?
Let me rephrase if I've got the question right, Bunty. So you're saying that at some level, inside of us, so in some sense, let me rephrase it. There is somebody or a version or different versions of us inside of us, and there is a version that we present or participate with other.
True.
Uh, and the question is, why is there this difference between the inside and the outside versions of us? I think that's the abstract version of what you were trying to ask. If I'm
Yeah, it
Yeah.
could be that.
Um, it I, I don't know why that is the case, Bunty, honestly, but I think we all have collect. So if we were to ask another question around this, it would be, what produces human behavior? What is producing this behavior at this moment in time in Bunty, in me, or whoever is going to watch this, and their responses to how they're viewing this, how they're anticipating or assimilating this. Um, so that question is a very, very open question. What produces human behavior? Different disciplines have tried to come at this, and uh, I think they've years of their journeys of research and uh, insights have left them in the end with seeing the glass half full and half empty. And sometimes even in these different disciplines, they would have complementary answers, overlapping, complementary, and sometimes you'll have contradictory answers to them. Um, One of the ways of looking at this would be, one of the variables that produces human behavior is our past experiences and expectations. So imagine there was experience on this side and expectation. So experience influences expectation, influences experience, influences expectation, influences. So it's a circle. It keeps going on. It's a spiral until a point where there's a shift that happens, and one wants to make that shift. That okay, and one becomes an observer and witness to one's experience and expectation, and wants to make the shift in either of them, so that a different spiral could then be created from there. Till such time, we all are inconsistent, or there is asymmetry between the inside and the outside that continues, and that I think pretty much continues for a long time for a lot of people. So I've just attempted at building onto your question. I know it is not adequately answered, but you can build on that further.
No, in fact, it's a beautiful answer, because it is actually tackled the ground where this begins from, in my head at least. I have a slightly nuanced question, and I want to know if you still have the same answer or at least a similar point of view about it. In my head, I try and be as honest as I am in my mind as I am with my words. I say as because I am unsure how pure I am in terms of understanding the whole process yet. But the effort is definitely there, at least in select times, at least on episodes when I'm recording, I do not filter anything and I try and present whatever comes. In fact, many a time I may not even have a thought in terms of planning it. So sometimes as a writer, when I relook at some of the episodes, I laugh at myself. इतना साल लगाया इंग्लिश सीखने में, अभी भी ठीक से बोलता नहीं. And yet the beauty is because it is raw, I trust it more. I say to myself, this is what you're trying to form words even as the thoughts are being formed. And that is a good level of honesty to approach the subject from, if you are asking others to be honest on the podcast. That is how I view my ground. So coming back to the question, my question is, with this attempt, do you still think what you said about human behavior stays, or now there is another level of subtlety to, it's not reached the observation stage fully yet. Once in a while it is observational. There is a pause between the thought and the doing sometimes. There is a study of this mind-body mechanism called Bunty, trying to do something. So there is a study that happens. Is it all the time? No. Does it happen as often that I have noticed it? Yes, I have. So from that point of view, does your answer still hold good, or is there another spiral, as you would call it, in operation?
I think we all have experience of going to Wikipedia. Wikipedia here being just a placeholder. And one of the interesting things that we find when we go to Wikipedia is there are many hyperlinks. You go on one page and there are several hyperlinks. Then you click on that hyperlink and it takes you another page, and that page has a lot of hyperlinks. So I believe human conversation and some of the deep inquiries have that Wikipedia nature. When you go in one and then it opens another rabbit hole, and then you go there, and then you're trying to just and as you keep entering these different rabbit holes, sometimes you lose the ground as to where you started and how's the connection. So is there a case that we have an inconsistency between what we think, what we feel, what we say, what we do? Actually, that's a subject of my upcoming book in a way, because I try to nuance that in a few pages. And it is indeed the case that, I'm reminded of Amitabh Bachchan's dialogue in Agnipath. That remember that scene when his mentors are planning an assassination, and he suddenly walks in, and he's seated on the table, and the phone rings, right? And then he looks at the people and he says, "ये अजीब चीज बनाई है, इंसान सोचता कुछ है, बोलता कुछ है, करता कुछ है." Actually, there is a lot of profoundness there, because it is indeed the case that many a times we think something, we feel something, we say something, we do something else. So there is what I try to define as inconsistency between think, feel, say, do. Not only that, even within thinking, there is inconsistency. Within your thinking, there will be inconsistency. Within your feelings, you may have mixed emotions for the same subject, same topic. And we all, I think if we are good enough student of our own selves, we would, in the same conversation, contradict so many times. So the same thing also happens. So let's establish that there is this bug or feature called the inconsistency between think, feel, say, do. And then some of it is adaptive, because sometimes you don't want to hurt. Like if I know that right now I don't want to hurt Bunty, then I may hold back my feeling, and it could be helpful for you. So sometimes the help. So one of the things that I've been blessed with for the last 10 years is doing 2x2 grids. So imagine on the x-axis there is I harm, I help, and on the y-axis it is to harm and help you, right? So sometimes I harm to harm you, but sometimes I harm to help you. Sometimes I help to help you, sometimes I help to harm you, right? If we are good enough student of our own selves, we do all four of them. And in that case, sometimes honesty may not be the right thing, because you may want to be inconsistent, because you want to harm the other person, but you know that you want to help the other person by harming. So I believe there is adaptiveness and maladaptiveness to even indexing of our honesties or vulnerabilities. And maybe there is a lot of thinking and reflection that is needed there. Again, my view on this is limited, and I'm just on my journey right now.
Okay. So, although I had planned another question, but you've left it at a place where I have to ask this one instead. In the line of inquiry that I've been trying to understand, thanks to my practice of Vipassana, intent seems to hold a lot of importance. So while you're drawing the grid, and okay, I'll try and combine both the questions here. Do you think when one tries to label a truth or come up with a truth which is underlying to all these conditions that arise from there, where intent being one of them very strongly, because we live in our minds. In my head, I try and define that this is where we live most, because our experiences are being felt most intensely in our heads. So while you did draw a quadrant where the variables kept shifting, but my assimilation might still be one.
But you go on mute, sorry. Yeah.
So the idea is that when we are engaging with another person, there is a certain number of things that are happening. My own mindset, my understanding of your mindset, the communication itself, with its own variables, the words and what gets communicated. So it's very, one has to get into hair splitting if one has to be very precise with every momentary understanding of what is really happening, and that requires a mind which is fully developed, as they call it in Indian tradition of sorts. But while we are where we are, and we are on the path to understanding ourselves and what is happening around us, how do you then view intent? With the other day also, I had this question in my head, which was very loosely around this, but how do you see this when somebody, even if I am right now trying to pin it down to one line of understanding, whereas you are going deeper and saying, no, even that needs to be questioned, even that needs to be questioned. Is there a contradiction there? Is there a conflict there? How do you see this?
So one of the things, Bunty, I've tried to uh, coach my own self into is whenever we come across words that have a lot of metaphysical nature to it, a conceptual nature to it, where you can't point out to anything in physical space and say that is intent, right? So I can point out to color blue, right? Assuming that we all have a shared vocabulary and shared understanding of the color blue. Anything that is of a metaphysical nature or a conceptual nature or a largely conceptual nature, I've come to believe that we have been handed down these words, these concepts from different traditions and different motivations and different uh, generations. And each of these words actually are, I believe, each of these words deserve many PhD students or PhD level of inquiry uh, or scientific temper or an inquiry temper to even unpack what these words stand for. Um, in absence of which, uh, you're right that um, if you take a person who's just learning, who's never driven a vehicle ever in life, and the person says, I want to learn driving a vehicle, you don't put that person on a freeway where the minimum speed is 150 kilometers per hour. You don't do that because what's going to happen to others or them or both. Unfortunately, the current world that we've come to occupy, um, the movement of physical goods and services is limited in the physical space, but the movement of the intangible concepts has just skyrocketed. And I believe that we do not even have the learner's license to drive these things in conversations, in concept. And unfortunately, we're meeting with so many accidents day in and day out because we don't get a grasp on. We feel sometimes groundless or roofless or uh, so my invitation would be to have separate dialogue and separate discoveries around each of these words before even saying that is this more important than the other.
Okay. One clarification: it wasn't about it was about the approach more than the factor of importance in the sense. In fact, you did answer the first question in a manner that I was looking at, that sometimes it may be important to leave things open-ended for people to come to their own conclusions at their own time, in their own way. Even having said that, if one has to come up with a one-line understanding of things, the same line may have meant different things to me at different points of time as my understanding and practice grows. And because words are just words finally, while they are good to communicate, sometimes they are hindrances to understanding. Being a writer myself, very often I have to deal with people where I'm trying to communicate concepts or understand or being understood in the space that one would want to be understood. Very often, when even with people like you and me who may be vibing well, for want of a better term, but even when talking, one has to really be careful with the word that one is using so that it is the closest to what I have been trying to communicate. And just hope and pray that you will take it in the same spirit, because that is the intangible that nobody has control of. So that's where I want to put this. Another thing that I want to ask you, I'll bring it down to very basic levels. I've had friends earlier and even now sometimes. Why talk about such things? They are not practical, uh, or they are empty philosophy. Uh, there are two sides to this question. One is this part, and the second is the importance of moral values in this kind of questioning. Because that is also often I'm contemplating doing something new, provoked by a friend of mine who's seen me change. Like I had this line, I was dedicated to corruption. So what I meant is in the head that anything that helps sell my concepts, sell my ideas, I would go all out with knowing that what I'm trying to present is the best that I want to for the client or for whatever. And anything that helps me sell it is good enough. So the process doesn't matter, the ends justify the results kind of thing. Over a period that changed, I started seeing myself differently and started working on it. It takes a long time to really understand oneself, and if that is helping you keep your place in the world, it is even more difficult because then it opens up vulnerabilities of a sort that one is not prepared for. But luckily, I stuck on to it, and with good friends accompanying me, doing the same search for themselves, uh, found certain things. So now this new thing that I am trying, one of the things that is coming to me is um, important as it is to present concepts to people. How practical is a question that I will perhaps be asked once I go to the market, even if it is not fully commercial in nature. And second is how important are moral values in a world where unfortunately the eyeballs are taken by all those who are less than moral. So these are the two questions I have. One is the first one, and the second is the moral values part of it.
Again, Bunty, I feel the least qualified to even attempt answering these questions. I can just share some early views, which may be just sometime back I came across this concept called game A and game B. Apparently, there's a university in America called the Santa Fe Institute, and in the last decade, in the early part of the last decade, a few people descended there trying to look at what's happening in the political space, economic space, social space. And the reason why they looked at it is because they wanted to see the outcomes produced by these systems, the kind of candidates we get, the kind of leaders we get, the kind of inequalities, are they adaptive, are they maladaptive um, for the species, for the planet. So they looked at this, and that's where I think this coinage happened of the term, the game A and the game B. So game A, in a very early sense, is where the constant thing is outsmarting each other. So, for example, on this conversation, I'll try to outsmart you. I'll try to be slightly more witty or say things to impress somebody and try to win the conversation, belittle you, or we know those games. I think at least I played those games pre 2012. We all know them. And they said this if we keep playing this game of outsmarting and out exploiting, and this won't this won't be healthy for the civilization to exist. There could be something which some of the researchers are calling the potential collapse of civilization itself. So, okay, what do? They started looking at, can we do game B? Right? So can we set up a game B? A game B which is driven by different kind of index, where GDP is not the only indicator. where financial wealth is not the only indicator. There are other indicators. So in my own small way, I've seen that at least about last 10 years, a lot of people have been trying to understand and trying to create a lot of models in political space, economic space, social space of different ways of interactions. And what should we look for from these interactions in terms of inputs and outcomes. But again, within game A and game B, again, there are, it's not homogeneous, it's not monolith. They would have their own things of what they call what is the right thing to do. In fact, I'm reminded, I feel blessed that's, between 2014 and 2019, I was fortunate that I could do some online courses on the side. One of the courses that I'd taken was a gentleman called Michael Sandel, and a very, very famous course that he ran called "What's the Right Thing?" It's about justice. What do you consider as justice? And justice is a close cousin of morality and ethics and stuff. So some of it could be encoded, and you could have rules around it, and some of it becomes norm. Like for example, this conversation, we're doing this dialogue for the first time in this manner, Bunty. But none of us set up any rule for this, right? You and I, we never set any rule for it. And as we are discussing, the norm is evolving. But we know that there is some norm which we both are bringing here. For example, when you're speaking, I'm trying not to interject. When I'm speaking, you've been kind enough to give me this space to speak. We never agreed upon it, but we are building this norm, right? But suppose somebody comes in and starts interjecting, and that becomes maladaptive. Then you ask a question: what's the right thing to do? And when you keep at it, you reach a point where you want to define something better, right, virtuous, and then you encode it back to here and now. That's a massive 1,000-2,000 years project, I think. And we are only at the beginning of the game B from different people and avatars. So that's my submission of the.
That is so beautiful. That is so beautiful. My little submission to that, in my understanding, obviously there are days when I'm quite. One is not qualified to be on those kind of teams where you're studying, or I haven't studied it as much. But this constant sense of looking at oneself and the ecosystem that we belong to, whether personal or public in that sense. One is, honestly, there have been days that I've been very, very upset with how things are moving and at the pace they are moving, and the lack of civility in terms of understanding, in terms of trying to give space to others. Just yesterday, one funny incident happened. I stay in a place next to the highway where people drive on the wrong side, which may cause accidents as we come out of our society, so to speak. Very often, sometimes I've been angry, sometimes I've had fights, sometimes I've stopped people and asked them to go on the right side, and I've done all kinds of things over a period, keeping on looking at myself and seeing how I can make my peace, but still unclear about how dangerous that is for them. Sometimes they are with their own kids, and I don't think it's fun to see anybody get into an accident. So yesterday, for the first time, a new thing happened. There's this one guy who stopped. He was coming on the wrong side, and I stood with him. I said, I asked him, "Are you doing the right thing?" He says, "Absolutely." And I was stunned. I said, "What if your kid was crossing and would probably have an accident?" He says, "That's unimportant right now. So many people are doing it. Why are you stopping only me?" I said, "That's okay, but I've stopped you now that you're talking to me. Why don't you go on the right side?" He says, "No, I'll go on this side because I'm doing the right thing already." And that kind of was a new learning, honestly. Because on one hand, you did mention that we started this without norms. Those norms exist in our heads. And suddenly if he says that norm is unimportant, I have nothing to say. In fact, I just smiled and I said, yeah, okay, you go. If you feel what you're doing is right, I have nothing to say to you. Now, this is happening far too often, far too long, and I think all over the world. I wouldn't want to get into which side I see myself on or whatever. But it is very heartbreaking to see the people who don't have a voice are being subjugated in every possible manner. Uh, and everybody is turning vindictive. My outlook of this in the space that you mentioned, if you're talking about 1,000, 2,000 years, it's quite heartbreaking again when one sees the time scale. But on an individual level, I get very motivated by a story that I'd heard about Guru Nanak being asked when he was at Haridwar कि ये कलयुग है क्या? तो इसे जिस युग में आप जीना चाहें और जीते हैं आप उसी युग में हैं. तो आप सतयुग में जीना चाहते हैं तो आप सतयुग में हैं. आप अपने कर्मों से कलयुग में जीना चाहें तो कलयुग में हैं. It's up to you. And I find a lot of strength in this very vulnerable space still, because it still is heartbreaking, but it puts the onus back on me that I have to work and I have to be right all the time, as often as I can be in my head. In fact, that's why I like your example of when you decide, okay, this is the right. If you're continuously being right, then a new right appears. Okay, maybe this is how I can be naturally without having to attempt to be right. So I find hope in that one little thing, that every person who changes is changing one ecosystem within this system. If the bigger they are, maybe they have fans and people who follow them in various ways. I find Hollywood stars talking the right thing. I find politicians speaking the right thing. Industrialists saying the right thing. There are people everywhere. They are smaller in number yet, but it is beautiful because we look up to them and they are talking the right things. Another question that has been running in my head when it comes to personal agency: how do you view it, considering that you've been studying systems where unfortunately it becomes statistical more often than not when most people study it, but thanks to your innate understanding of your own attempt to hear many points of view and then come to what you think is probably the closest to what resonates with you, is what I understand of what you do most of the time. And maybe share with us what has resonated with you, and maybe the conversation is long, you can't say that the entire half an hour resonated with you, but sometimes some parts may have worked for you. How do you see personal agency in this day and age where everything is becoming part of the system only, and thanks to artificial intelligence, our smartphones, and everything is a cult of sorts. Of sorts, I don't want to really use such strong words. It's just my lack of vocabulary that is affecting me here. But basically, okay, I am this, I am this, I am this. We are so much in a hurry to nail ourselves to one spot. Whereas here you're not even allowing one answer, the finality of being the answer. You think, yeah, this is probably one of the ways to look at it. How do you see personal agency in a space like that?
So in some sense, if I'm participating in this question and the attempt at an answer, and also participate in the social system that we are all a part of, to that extent, there is something which is emergent, and it's more of a verb than a noun. So at this minute, which is 8:53 on 27th of October, uh, I am attempting at this question because you've created an environment for this question to be looked at. Um, you may turn around and say, what if you were just with your own self and attempting at this question? And the answer would be yes. So there is something that is inside of me in some conceptual sense. There is something inside of me and something outside of me. There are things happening inside and there are things happening outside, and there is an interaction happening, and this interaction has a certain habit to it, and some unhabit to it as well, and they're all emerging over a period of time. If 10 years back, if you had asked this question, I would not be able to even look at what's happening inside right now. I would not know what my left leg is doing right now in the conversation, even as I speak with you. I would not know whether I should pace the next words slowly or more, because it would be more the habitual treadmill that is overrun. To the extent that our conditioning is participating in this conversation, and we are just getting overwhelmed by it, or we're bearing the fruits of it. To that extent, there would be the agency only for the experience of it, not the changing of it. But the moment I'm able to shift and make tweaks, to that extent, there is agency with all of us. And that agency is more of a verb than a noun, because I can't point it and say this is it. It's a verb, and that verb is interacting with other verbs inside and outside, and there is somebody witnessing this here now. To that extent, I believe in agency. I'll rest it there unless you have some more problem. And still, one other qualification is I genuinely believe that I am in the beta mode. My understanding itself is in the beta mode. Everything around me is in the beta mode. And hence, finalities are suicidal, I may say.
Okay. I want to use two simple words to elucidate to many listeners who may not be participative of what you just explained. So are you subtly, these are my words now, pointing towards intent and environment being moving all the time as they are? So what they'll end up creating for us who are participative in this with our intent, that includes perhaps action, and the environment also is moving from the time that you mentioned this to the time that I am answering this or taking this forward. So because we are entities that belong to time and space, and that is why we are constantly evolving into some kind of being. So Hemant, a minute earlier wasn't the Hemant that is now, and the Hemant later, a minute later, would be different because of whatever we've spoken or whatever you've experienced. You would have known that as well. For this is for explanation's sake, not so much to tell you so much. So have I understood that correctly? Is that more or less what you've been talking about?
Actually, you've invoked something else. I go back to Wikipedia hyperlinks. So there is the changing, which is changing whether we like it or not, want it or not. There is the unchanging also, whether we like it or not, you know. So imagine there is changing and there is unchanging, and there is the change that we want and there is this unchange that we want, right? So something is changing, something is not changing. Some changes we want and some changes we don't want, or something to be unchanged. My experience is that we live in all the four quadrants. It's just that we are not a good student of our own self. We don't stop enough. There are not enough pit stops to see that there are these four quadrants, and there could be many more quadrants, by the way. So even in the example that you beautifully shared, Bunty, which is the Hemant a minute or the moment back, now, and next. At some level, who's the one who's been able to witness all the three? Because unless there is the connector, how would the three disparate get together? So there is something connecting or overseeing or presiding or witnessing or agentifying the changes in these three. So we'll have to go there also in a very slow and very, think of it like performing a very, very complicated surgery. You know, when doctors perform surgery, they can't be in a combat mode of a snipe of when you're in the enemy battlefield. So I think most of these concepts, they require a very high level of surgery with a lot of patience and over time. So yeah.
Okay. If one were to ask you when you are trying to so since I am in the receipt of a lot of the insights that you share very often, also that you are writing a book. My submission on one of the facts is that these insights, when they strike me on my own about myself or about human behavior, some of the stuff that we've been talking about right now, over a period that one understands them, one's ability to comprehend what one has been stricken by, and, oh, this is how it works, or this is what I'm fearful of, this is what I'm doubtful of, oh, doubt arises here. Oh, this is a commonality I have with others in the world, or on one hand, I find them helpful because it tells me that the mind is being sharpened in terms of understanding some subtleties that were not privy to it prior to this. Like you did say in a very holistic manner, that 10 years back you wouldn't have been able to even comprehend the question in the same manner and would be in a hurry to answer it perhaps, or would not weigh your words. Although I do not remember when we last met, I thought we were quite well measured even in those days. But again, it's relative. Our own understanding, the times that we met and the subjects that we were discussing then were perhaps a lot more quote unquote worldly at that point of time. So this kind of gives me the idea maybe everything that we say should be quote unquote, because it only means one particular aspect of what we think it should mean. So how much value do you give these insights, and how do you see the journey vis-a-vis these insights? Are there any bad days where you are concerned about कि यार आज पानी पूरी खाऊं कि पूरी भाजी खा लूं? I want to indulge myself, for example, something as habit forming as that, as we are conditioned to be. Are those things that trouble you, that lead to some insights? Are you at peace with them? how does a quote unquote again just intellectual person who's working on something which is so profound and requires a peaceful state of mind most of the time, if nothing else, so that you can really study what is happening to you or to others, or when you're listening to someone. How do you make your peace with the excellent pani puri that is available wherever you stay?
So there are, I could decipher a bunch of questions there. Let me see if I got them right and if I'm addressing them. One is, do I go through bad days? Yes, many. Do I have indecisions? Many. So question is, what has changed?
And what makes it, and how do you make your peace with it?
Yeah.
The process for people. Sorry, I want to give a bit of a context to that I didn't have before. I believe people who are watching this episode will be far and rare few compared to even the other episodes that happen, because a lot of people feel that this is very serious. So most of my friends call up and they say, I've seen 3 or 4 of your episodes, please don't mind. Or somebody says, I love this one, and then they are immediately defensive, oh, but I haven't seen too many, as if like I would judge them. I do not, because I do understand this is a very rare journey by itself for myself as well. So the context is that I'm trying to humanize this whole thing for them, in the sense of, even in the space that people like you and me talk about, or we have the same fears, the same doubts, same vulnerabilities. And then there is something that works for us in some spaces, and we are trying to share that as an offering to the world. That's what the objective is. So yeah, that's the context I want to.
So just building on the question that I had come to, which is what has changed. I think one clear, a few things are very clear, crystal clear. One is the quality of presence in conversation has changed. Quality of the ability to uh, to 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 be there in the conversation. Earlier, I would not be there in the conversation. I would be there in some other conversation. Um, and this is applicable to, I can abstract it out and I say the quality of presence in the here and now has changed. So whether I'm eating, whether I'm doing something, there's a distinct change in the texture and the experience that I have. So what that does, Bunty, for me is, if I am, so 10 years back, if I'm doing this, I'm already thinking next and the next and the next and the next. And when I reach to the next, I'm not there and I'm on some other next. So the levels of dissatisfaction, the intensity of dissatisfactions from the here and now would be different. Now it's not so. Uh, what I experience of here and now, in most, not all the times, most increasingly most of the time, is very different. And I've come to this realization that there is no distinction between action and fruit. Actually, action is the fruit itself. In the performing of the action itself is the fruit embedded in it. How do I say so? 10 years back, or if somebody would have met me in 97, I could not speak a single sentence in English. I just could not. And today, if I am able to, irrespective of what it generates, this is a fruit already. The fact that I am able to speak with Bunty, in a world which is unfortunately being driven to the cliff by constant distractions. Just to have one person's such beautiful attention is a blessing in itself. So irrespective of whether somebody watches this or not, and I'll be thankful if somebody watches it, I'll be deeply grateful. But this already is a fruit in itself. So that has changed, Bunty. So mindless consumption, mindless pursuits are less, and there are more mindful pursuits, mindful experiences, which itself generates a very different kind of peace with oneself. That I feel is a blessing. That's how I would.
That's such a beautiful answer. One has heard a lot of versions of being in the moment and what benefits it brings. But this contextualization that it itself is the blessing rather than seeing some distant fruit in the future. This seeding is complete in itself. This is the seed, the action, and the fruit, all of it in one go. I think this has been an amazing conversation, as good or even better than I thought it would turn out to be. Most times I try, and while I do not prepare anything and everything is impromptu, one is consciously trying to put the conversation where some of the vulnerability and some of the quote unquote tricks are shared, in which the guest has strengthened oneself from the experience itself rather than some tips or some gyan that one has read. I try and make it very real life and every day, but this was an indulgence that I wanted, that I get Hemant on my podcast and talk like I would want to and figure out, okay, things. At times I have kind of tried to stop and give it some kind of language that people may buy into, but I think the presence itself is so soothing and so empowering. I think the environment that we've been able to create thanks to whatever we've conversed about at this point. I will converse with you many more times, I think, once this is over, considering that you leave things open-ended, which is a new way to look at conversations for me as well. I try and bring it to a place where it makes easy for people to consume it, and if they want to change something, let us see. The intent is good. Someday something will come out of it, or maybe not. It doesn't. Now that you've given me a new way to relook at it, it doesn't matter. That we've done this is in itself the most satisfying part. So thank you so much, Hemant, and what a pleasure this is. What a pleasure.
Thank you, Bunty. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.